What does it mean? Yeah, this is a good question. I think it is to be taken metaphorically, but I mean the thing is that metaphor and reality are not kind of separate issues. Yeah, metaphor is very, or in this case, it might be a simile for something, or it might be more like a myth or a legend, if you like, about how the world evolves. And if you have listened to Bhante Sujato talking about myth and legends, he will always make the case that mythology and reality are not separate. Yeah? Mythology is just a particular way of looking at reality. It is not a literal truth, but it is a kind of, it shows certain patterns in nature and certain ways of thinking about the world, which are still applicable. So, the myth is not divorced from reality. So I think the idea about the Agañña Sutta is how defilements arise, how kind of the mind always tends to incline towards coarser states. So you have this long mythology of these beings, and they kind of start to get, first of all, they are very content, and then greed starts to arise. And then as they move on in this cycle, the greed gets worse and worse, and they get more and more, things get more and more coarse. Yeah. So if there is no restraint in the mind, if there is no countervailing factors that stop you, then the tendency will always be to become more coarse, until eventually one day you are kind of, you end up in the very end there, you end up in the human realm. You start off in this very, very high, lofty realms, and gradually you move down to coarser and coarser states. And I think this is the inclination of beings, this kind of movement towards coarseness. And you need something to hold you back, and to move in the opposite direction, to hold back from these things. And then, that goes even beyond the human realm. And this is why the majority of beings tend to get reborn in lower realms, because of that tendency towards coarseness at the very end. And I think this is a part of the message there, that we have to be very careful, because it's so easy to kind of go by these habits, deeply ingrained habits of defilements that tend to kind of lead you really astray in a very, very bad way. And so that is, I think, one of the main messages of the Agañña Sutta. There is also there kind of some of the etymology towards the end of the Agañña Sutta. They talk about how they elect someone, and it's kind of interesting, this idea of they elect a leader among them to kind of look after, to make sure things are shared properly, and things are done in the right ways, and that crime is punished, and these kind of things. I think that's, if my memory serves me right, that's what you find at the end of towards the end of the Agañña Sutta. And those things, whether they are, that's kind of where we might be getting more into the reality of India at that time. I think it is in large part, we can actually read some of the values of Indian society into what you see there, because that is probably in part how they would do things at that time in India. They had the republics in the Ganges region, in the Ganges plain. And those republics were probably governed partly in that way, by choosing and by selecting people to, in a kind of semi-democratic way. I don't think it was fully democratic. It was probably more democratic in the kind of Greek democratic sense. There was the citizenry, there were the establishment, if you like, the householders who had an established position in that society, and they were the ones who partook in that democracy. Democracy wasn't for the slaves. Was it for women? I'm not sure if it was for women. Quite likely it was not for women either. And it was for that, citizenry at that time. So I think towards the end of the Agañña Sutta, you're looking probably a little bit more closer to what actually were the customs in India at the time. Whereas the first part of it is a mythology that talks about the general evolution of the human mind. Something like that. I'm not an expert in mythology, legends at all. And I would really recommend you to ask the same question of Bhante Sujato. I think you've had him on before, but you may want to have him on again, because this is kind of his area of expertise. And it's actually very interesting what he has to say about some of these things.